I don't talk about this. Not to my wife, not to my friends, not to anyone who knows me now. The version of me that this happened to feels like a completely different person. And I mean that literally, not in the way people say it to sound deep. I was 25, maybe 26. I had no mortgage, no kids, no one waiting up for me. I had a beat-up Subaru and a backpack, and I thought that was enough to be invincible. I used to do solo trips into the Appalachians a few times a year. Not on-trail stuff, not campsite with a fire ring stuff. I mean genuinely off the grid. No marked paths, no cell service, no other people. I'd drive to some random trailhead, disappear into the backcountry, and not surface for 3 or 4 days. My friends thought I was insane. They weren't entirely wrong. There's a kind of arrogance that comes with being young and lucky too many times in a row, and I had it bad. This particular trip was Cherokee National Forest. It's the reason I will never do another solo trip as long as I live.
I'd been out there 2 days when the sky turned on me. The clouds came in from the west fast. That angry, bruised purple-green that you don't see with regular afternoon storms. I noticed them around 3 p.m. and told myself it was fine. I'd hiked through rain before. But within an hour, the temperature had dropped fast enough that I stopped mid-trail and dug a fleece out of my pack, which I almost never do in summer. That was the first sign I should have paid attention to. By the time the rain started, it wasn't rain. It was a wall of water moving sideways. The wind bent smaller trees over like they were made of paper, and I could hear branches cracking and dropping from the canopy above me. It sounds like gunshots going off in every direction. Lightning was striking close enough that I could smell it, that sharp ozone smell, and close enough that I didn't need to count seconds between the flash and the bang. I had a metal-framed pack on my back. I was hiking at elevation. I knew what that meant. I kept moving because standing still felt worse. I was completely soaked through, scanning both sides of the trail for anything. A rock overhang, a dense stand of trees, anything. And then, through the trees to my left, I saw a shape that didn't belong. Dark, angular, low to the ground. I blinked water out of my eyes and stared at it. It was a cabin. I can't tell you what that felt like unless you've been genuinely scared of dying in the woods and then had your entire situation flip in a single second. I practically ran. I pushed the door open and fell inside, and just stood there with water pouring off me, breathing like I'd been sprinting. The smell hit me first. Old wood, old ash, something animal underneath it all. Musty in a way that sat in the back of your throat. But it was dry. That was all I cared about. The cabin was tiny. 1 room. A chair, a small table, a cot frame against the far wall with no mattress, a stone fireplace packed full of old ash and debris on the right side. Not much else. Or so I thought. I stripped out of my soaked shirt, found a semi-dry layer in my pack, and lay down on the floor, because there was nowhere else to go. I was in pure survival mode at that point. I wasn't curious, I wasn't scared. I was just grateful to be out of the storm. I closed my eyes and let myself breathe normally for the first time in an hour. It was maybe 15 minutes before I started actually looking around. I switched on my headlamp and pointed it at the walls. There was more stuff in the cabin than I'd registered when I stumbled in. A sleeping bag rolled up in the corner near the cot frame. And this is the thing that first bothered me. It didn't look old. The rest of the place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But that sleeping bag looked like it had been placed there recently. There were also a couple of cans and sealed water jugs on the table. Not ancient, not rusted, just sitting there. I told myself it was probably another hiker or a hunter using the place as a base camp. That wasn't unreasonable. Remote shelters like that get used by all kinds of people. But Then I looked at the door.
The marks near the door frame stopped me cold. I'd noticed them when I came in and written them off as weathering. Up close, with the light on them, there was no question what they were. Scratches. Dozens of them at varying depths, some shallow and faint, some gouged so deep into the wood that the grain had splintered. They were frantic. No pattern, no order, just frantic. I stood back and looked at the door itself. Simple latch on the inside. Fine. But then I pushed it open and looked at the exterior. There was a metal bracket mounted on the outside of the frame. Old iron, heavy, positioned exactly where a padlock hasp would go. Designed to lock the door from the outside. There was no corresponding lock mechanism on the inside. None. The only way to secure this door was from out there. I stood in the doorway in the rain for a moment, just staring at that bracket. Then I stepped back inside and went to the window. The glass was intact, surprisingly so for a building this old. When I got close, I understood why. There were screws in each corner of the frame, driven in from the outside, sealing it shut. And along the interior edges of the frame, more scratches, deeper than the ones by the door. These weren't someone frustrated or idle. These were desperate. They looked like someone had worked at that frame with their bare fingers for a long time. Everything landed at once. The sealed window, the outside lock, the scratches in two separate places, at the door and at the only other possible exit. The sleeping bag that was too new. Someone had been kept here. I thought about leaving. I genuinely did. But the storm outside was still at full force. I could hear something that sounded like a full tree going down somewhere nearby, and I had nowhere else to go. Whatever had happened in this cabin felt like it was well in the past. The scratches had dried out and lightened the way old wood does. The sleeping bag was dusty when I touched it. I made the calculation, and I stayed. I want to be honest about that. I made a choice, and I think about it a lot.
I'm not sure how much time passed. The storm got louder, which I wouldn't have thought possible. The rain on the metal roof was like static, this constant crushing white noise that made it hard to think clearly, which is probably why I almost missed it. It started as something I felt more than heard, a subtle shift in the sound pattern. Scratching, or scraping, low and rhythmic, coming from outside the left wall. I sat up and stared at the wall like I could see through it. I told myself it was a branch. There had been branches near that side of the cabin, I was pretty sure. I was almost convinced. Then two heavy impacts on the porch. Not a branch, not debris. Two distinct thumps, one after the other, like weight being set down deliberately. I got to my feet without deciding to. I stood in the middle of the room and did that thing where you go completely still and stare at a fixed point, because somehow that makes your hearing sharper. I was listening for footsteps, for a voice, for anything that would tell me what was out there. But the rain made it impossible. If something was moving on that porch, I would never have heard it. My eyes went to the window. I couldn't look at it. I physically could not make myself turn and look directly at that window, because I knew that if someone was out there, that's where they'd be. And some part of my brain decided that not knowing was better than knowing. I stood there for what felt like 20 minutes. Gradually, very gradually, my heart rate started to come down. I started rebuilding the logical explanation. Storm debris. An animal. Maybe a raccoon, a possum, something looking for shelter the same as me. It wasn't a great explanation, but it was available, so I took it.
I was almost calm again when the door moved. Not opened, not knocked, moved. Like something had leaned its full weight against it from the other side. Slow and deliberate. The wood flexed inward. The latch rattled once, loud, and then the pressure released as suddenly as it had come. And I thought about the bracket on the outside of the door. The thought arrived fully formed, and once it was there, I couldn't get rid of it. Why would someone be outside in this storm, circling the cabin, touching the walls, pressing on the door, without coming in? The door wasn't locked. There was nothing stopping anyone from opening it. Unless the point wasn't to come in. Unless the point was to keep me inside until they were ready. I don't know if that was the right conclusion, or if my brain had finally tipped into panic. But I stopped caring. I started shoving things into my pack. Whatever was out there had made a mistake. They touched the door. And now I was leaving. Right now. Storm or no storm. I was maybe 30 seconds from walking out that door. The window exploded inward. I spun around. Glass splattered across the floor. Rain and wind suddenly roaring into the room. And something had come through the window. Something that hit the floor and skidded. And then the walls were orange, and the heat was immediate and physical, like opening an oven the size of a room. The fire spread in seconds. Not the way fire spreads when it catches by accident. This was different. Faster. Total. The walls went up like they'd been waiting for it. The ceiling caught. The whole structure was going, and I hadn't processed any of it yet. And when I hit the door, it didn't open. Jammed. Locked from outside. I threw my shoulder into it and felt it buckle. Hit it again and the hinges gave. The whole door came down and I went with it. Out into the rain and the mud, and I scrambled to my feet and ran. I couldn't see anything. I was running blind through the dark and the rain with my arms up in front of my face, branches hitting me, the ground uneven under my feet. I could feel the heat of the cabin behind me, even in the rain, and I didn't look back. I just ran until my lungs told me I had to stop. I didn't stop. Something hit me from behind with enough force to take me off my feet. I went down hard, and there was a person on top of me. I couldn't see a face, couldn't see anything, just hands and weight, and the sound of someone screaming something I couldn't understand. He was going for my throat. I felt his fingers trying to find purchase, and I clawed at his face and bucked and managed to get a knee free and push him off, and then I was up and running again. He kept screaming behind me. I looked back once and saw the cabin fully engulfed, a fireball in the rain. Orange and roaring, the trees around it catching the light. The second time I looked, the glow was smaller and further. I kept running. I ran until my legs stopped working, found two fallen trees crossed against each other with a gap underneath, crawled into it and collapsed. I don't remember how many hours I stayed there.
At some point, my body started to feel like it belonged to me again, and I told myself very calmly, move or die. Whoever that was hadn't given up. He couldn't be far. So I got up and started walking, no idea where the trail was, no idea which direction was out, just walking. I stumbled onto a trail sometime before dawn and followed it until I found a trailhead. The first person I saw was a man loading gear into a truck, and he took one look at me and didn't ask any questions. He drove me to a hospital. Second-degree burns on my left forearm and the back of my neck. The doctor said I was lucky I hadn't inhaled more smoke. None of it was permanent.
I told the police everything I could. They were polite about it. I don't think much happened after that. My wife thinks I stopped doing solo trips because I grew up. She's not wrong, exactly. I did grow up. Just not the way she means it. I never told her about the cabin. I'm not sure I ever will.